So today is Monday, July 21st, 2025. My name is Miguel Angel Ramirez, and I'm interviewing John Olivares Espinosa for the Oral History Project as part of the Macondo Writers Workshop Oral History Project. We're on the campus of Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and it is the summer gathering of the Macondo Writers Workshop. Thank you, John, for agreeing to this interview. This interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed in the Nettie Benson Library Archives and Special Collections at the University of Texas in Austin. Please know that if there's anything that you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. Also, if you need to stop and use the facilities, please let us know. If there are any topics that you wish to discuss and I haven't asked, please do bring them up. Okay? So, we're going to get really kind of early into your life. So I'm going to ask you some early life questions. Yeah. So let's start with growing up in California. Can you tell me a little about your childhood and your family?
Yeah, so I was born in Indio, California, 1978. Indio is in the Coachella Valley, desert climate. I always describe it as 2 hours from east of Los Angeles, 2 hours from the Arizona border, 2 hours from the Mexican border. I was born in Indio because my family was actually living in Mecca, California, which is a very small town, primarily for, I'd say, agricultural workers. And so Indio was the closest hospital. And that's why I was born in Indio. And then when I was 8 years old, the family moved us from Mecca, California, to Indio, California, and that was maybe about a 30-minute drive on the highway, give or take. So I grew up in Indio from ages 8 till 18 when I graduated college. I lived in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home, and I'd say my father was a gardener. My mom was a special education teacher's aide. And I grew up with 2 brothers. I'm in the middle, so I have an older brother and a younger brother. We're about 3 to 4 years apart. And, one of the biggest things with growing up was my dad took us to work with him. So I started when I was 14, and my dad being a landscaper, he was self-employed. He had his own small business, had his clients and his work route. He'd take us to work. So I'd work with my dad, my brothers, and then whatever, other help. We call them workers. Whatever workers he had with him at a time, it always changed. So worked with my dad when we were in school, which is to say Saturdays. I started when I was 14, and my brother started when they were younger in age. But we'd work Saturdays and then school vacations, so like spring break, Christmas break, and then all of summer. And then if we had any kind of days off, like a Veterans Day was off or something like that, we'd work and we'd do things that I guess it's capable of doing, but like raking leaves, picking up the leaves, picking up any kind of other debris. And then the more we did it, the better we got at doing stuff. So our responsibilities kind of went up. So we'd mow lawns, use the weed whacker to edge, the grass and sidewalk, trim trees sometimes, or trim roses, and it just kind of varied. That was my kind of my childhood. I didn't do much growing up. Like I was not like baseball or any kind of sports. Just went to school. Did well. Maybe some club activities. The hammering.
So the next questions, the next kind of series of questions in relation to your early life is going to be any stories growing up that you especially recall. How did your parents feel about the role of education, reading, and writing?
Okay.
So those are the kind of questions to start thinking about.
Okay. Growing up, we didn't do many extracurricular activities. Like we weren't involved in like youth sports or anything like that. It was mostly just stuff at home. Family gatherings. In high school, there was some involvement. Trying to get ready for college. So some internships or doing stuff with fine art and whatnot. It was a pretty, stable childhood. I can say just very involved with family. We loved pop culture, so there was a lot of video games, a lot of movies on VHS and movie nights, and going to the movie theater, going to the mall. But that was my growing up.
What did those gatherings look like with your family?
Yeah, so traditionally, one of our traditions on Sunday was we'd go to church in the morning, and then right after church, we'd either go out to eat somewhere or pick something up to eat, but then we'd go straight to my grandfather's. We called it the ranch, but there was no livestock on it. But he lived on a kind of a large property. So we'd go to see my grandfather and my grandmother. These were my mom's parents. And her brother, who was middle age, also lived there and at the time. And so we'd spend a few hours at Grandpa's place, and because it was out kind of like in the middle of the desert, where they lived, it used to be a ranch, so there were still like these decrepit, like stables in a way, and still like leftover tools from like the previous owners. So it gave my brothers and I a lot of time to like kind of explore, right? Be out in the outdoors. So whether it was going through the drawers, digging up the dirt, when we were smaller, digging up dirt and making like mud pies or little mud lagoons. We'd go out to the desert and see what we could find out in the bushes, go as far as we can. We loved ghosts and ghost stories, and the place was old and decrepit, so we assumed it was haunted. So when on certain days when it was, say we were there for like Christmas or some holiday, and we were there past nightfall, the cousins and I, we'd go out and to the old stables and see if we'd find a ghost or whatnot. The house came with a golf cart. So we charge up the golf cart and ride around the desert and really take it to the maximum speed. So the house came with a golf cart, and we charge up the golf cart and ride around the golf cart in the desert, or what would be not the backyard because there was no grass, but this large area behind the house, and we just kind of go in circles at full speed and kind of just cause trouble like that. It was fun.
What kind of trouble would you get into?
Not too big trouble, but say with the golf carts, we'd ride around in laps and at full speeds and take the turn really fast. And I remember one time we had packed the golf cart with a few cousins, and it tipped over, and a bunch of us fell out of the golf cart, and as far as I know, none of the adults knew that we had done that. Just stuff like that. But otherwise, I wouldn't call this trouble. We'd get sticks, and then we'd find pocket knives, blades that were left around, and we'd like shave the sticks into arrow points, and take other sticks and find like twine somewhere and make homemade bow and arrows, all without the supervision of anyone, because it's my grandfather, my grandmother, and they're too old to like follow us around. And we kind of knew our limits with danger, but we do stuff like that. Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of rock throwing. There was road tracks across the highway, and we'd cross the highway, which was, we were little kids, very dangerous to do, and we'd put pennies on the road tracks and then and then we'd come home and then wait for the train to pass by and smash the pennies and collect them later.
John, how did your parents or family feel about the role of education, particularly reading and writing?
100% supportive. My mom was a special education teacher's aide, so she was always in the classroom. And my mom, even though she was, grew up as a field worker, working in the fields, and had graduated high school, her dad, my grandfather, did not support her education at all. She didn't. My grandfather did not want his kids to go to school. He would rather have them working and earning money, and he just loathed that the younger kids, because my mom comes from a larger family, 7, 8 siblings, and my mom, I believe, was the youngest, or at least the youngest female, but I think she was the youngest of the 7 or 8. So the ones who were older were already out of the house and working, didn't complete their education, and my mom and my uncle did, and they loved learning. My grandfather didn't. So when my mom got this job about a year after high school, working at the local school that she went to, she wasn't formally trained, but obviously she would, along the lines, pick up, teaching tips or whatnot. So she completely encouraged us to read and write. So one of my earliest memories is my mom sitting down with me and reading to me and teaching me to read. And I remember when my mom sat me down and taught me how to write, how to hold a pencil and write my name. I still remember that. She never denied. We always had books, like children's books, and she never denied us books, even though there was no bookstore available. Like there was no Barnes and Noble. There was nothing available in Mecca. I know one of the ways I got books was through the book fair that came through the school. I know that was the one way I got books. Otherwise, I don't know where we got books. I didn't go to a bookstore till I was, my teens, I think, maybe a little younger. So my mom always encouraged us to read and write. My dad, even though he didn't have an education, it actually worked in reverse because he wanted an education. My dad is an autodidact. Like he's taught himself to do so many things. Like he's had very little formal training. And by little formal, I mean that sometimes there would be community opportunities to get a certification in something. So he would do that. But he wanted an education. Like, had my dad been born in a different time in a different place, like he would have been, educated. And then my dad would go to night school to learn English, or at least reinforce what he had already learned in English, trying to learn something more formal. My dad wanted us to go to college because he didn't want us to do what he did, which was working outside in the heat, doing physical labor, with a cap essentially on getting paid. So one of the reasons he took us to work with him is to kind of teach us several things, teach us work ethic, but to teach us like, this is what it's like, to do what I do. Like, you don't want to do this. You want to work, indoors in air conditioning. And so to us, going to college was always instilled with us. Like there was no real other choice. It was like, an obligation. We just, and I assumed everybody was going to go to college, that my classmates were going to go to college. And I had that assumption up to my senior year when I started asking friends like, hey, so where are you going to apply to college? And they're like, oh, I'm not going to go. Maybe I'll go to community college. And I was like dumbstruck. I'm like, what do you mean you're not going to go? Like, your parents are going to allow you to not go to college? Like, how does that work? So it was very much instilled in us to go to college. And they supported, our education. So I ended up going to the University of California, Riverside, UC Riverside, or UCR. UCR was an hour away from home, more or less kind of a straight shot. So it was a very easy, I lived on campus, so it was, it was far enough from home but close enough from home, to go home when I needed to also. So UC Riverside and that story is interesting because I knew I was going to go to college. I just didn't really know how that happened. I thought it just would happen organically. And in a way, it did and it didn't, because I was fortunate enough that in high school, some teacher, I don't know who, recommended me to a program called the Early Academic Outreach Program. And from what I gather, it was a kind of pre-college program for kids at Indio High School. I'm sure at other high schools in the Valley too. That just kind of gets them on the track of going to college. And so luckily so my high school had different tracks, right? You were either in the general education track, you were either in college prep track, or the honors track, and then much later in high school, you were in the AP track. So luckily, I was in the college prep track, but that didn't really mean much. It just kind of meant like you weren't super smart, but at least you turned in your work and put your name on the paper. Honors was really more for the were thought of the smart kids. They were mostly the white kids who went to high school. And so I was in the Early Academic Outreach Program, and I get maybe someone to check in on me every once in a while, maybe talk to me about college. I don't really remember, but what I do remember is that every year since my freshman year, we would take a trip to UC Riverside. Like, we'd take the day off school and we'd go on the bus and we get this tour. And that kind of helped me familiarize myself with the campus and, become a little comfortable with it. Back then it was a smaller campus, I guess, in size and student population, not so much anymore now. And so it wasn't as overwhelming as compared to where my brother went to school at UC Irvine. So when I went to visit him at UC Irvine at various times, like, it just seemed like very busy. I kind of really felt like it was a maze of sorts, like trying to find the path to your class while navigating this crowd of students. And UC Riverside was much more, laid back at the time. And now, what had happened was that I wanted to go to UC Irvine, though only because my brother was there. And so I applied to Irvine. I did the college application by myself. I didn't have anyone help me. My parents couldn't help me. My brother was in college at the time, couldn't help me. I remember I asked for letters of recommendation, from teachers, and just being like, "Oh, I'm going to apply to college. Can you write me a letter?" Like, I don't even know how I got those letters or where they sent them. I'm sure, obviously, I got in, so I did something right. And but I didn't get into Irvine, so I knew that I wasn't both like smart. I felt like I wasn't smart enough to go anywhere else, like UCLA or UC Berkeley. And then going anywhere outside of that, like, there was no point going to San Diego or any of that. It's like, this is my option, UC Riverside. It's as good as any. And, I'm certainly glad I went there.
I kind of want to continue this narrative of college. How did you decide on your major at UC Riverside?
Yeah, so in high school, I was fortunate enough. So I was I believe in college prep. I was in college prep English in my sophomore year, and the teacher, Mr. Graff, he was a very serious teacher and a very good English teacher. And so right at the beginning of the year, he had us read Lord of the Flies, which is a book that my brother had read, when he was in high school. And so I had familiarity with it, and he liked it, and I liked anything that my brother liked. And so the week that he assigned Lord of the Flies, my family and I went to Las Vegas. We drove to Las Vegas. So during the ride to Las Vegas, I read half the book, and then on the way back, it was about a 3-hour drive. On the way back, I finished the book. So on Monday, I went to class and I told the teacher, "Hey, Mr. Graff, I finished the book," and he didn't believe me. Right? He thought I was, BSing. And we took like a month and a half to like go over the book. So like the quizzes we take the quizzes fresh in my mind, and I'd answer. But by the end month and a half, I didn't remember anything. Well, I did remember. Anyhow, so I told him I had finished the book, and then soon after that, he had us do a creative writing assignment, which was to write a short story with the theme man versus nature, right? It was very gendered. It was like man versus nature. And I had written a short story about a person who grew and kept clones in his basement and would harvest them for organs, which was some idea that I got watching this, paranormal show previously. So I wrote this. So I wrote this story, about clones, and he really liked the story, and he praised me, praised the story. It impressed me. It finally caught his attention, made him kind of actually believe that I would be someone who would read this book. And then he confided in me that he was writing a novel during the evening. So it was, and then Mr. Grafton put me in honors for honors English for like my junior year. So I think that was kind of a early, not the only one, but kind of early start of being encouraged to write, or encouragement of my creative writing, because I would then write stories, on my own, after having that encouragement, because I felt like I could be a writer. UC Riverside was and still is the only UC campus that has a creative writing major. So I majored in creative writing. And so that was one of the incentives of going to Riverside, was it had a creative writing major. And I went in undeclared. I kind of explored some other topics, but ultimately I declared creative writing. And I also got a degree in sociology. I did that. But even before I went to UC Riverside, I knew of this creative writing major, and I kind of knew that's what I was going to do while giving other things a chance. And it was great. I learned so much in that undergraduate program. I mean, it was like the perfect place to learn creative writing at the time.
I know there's some stellar faculty at UC Riverside. Can you, John, tell us a little bit about maybe some of the professors that you studied with, or maybe some of the courses that really inspired your kind of trajectory as a writer or poet?
Yeah, so the creative writing major back then, this is, I went in 1996, but I think I really started in 1998 doing the degrees stuff. You had to pick between one of two tracks. You were either on the fiction track or you were on the poetry track. Whichever track you chose, you had to at least take one workshop from the other genre. So at the time, I thought I was going to do fiction, like I was on the fiction track. And so my idea was like, okay, I'm going to do fiction, but because I have to take this one class in genre, I'm going to first start with the poetry workshop because I want to get it out of the way, right? And then that way I can just focus on fiction. So I took, one of the first courses I took was Beginning Poetry Workshop. And the teacher there was, the professor there was Christopher Buckley, who was a poet who also shares a name with a conservative writer. And so he always has to tell people, I'm Christopher Buckley, the poet, not the conservative writer that you're thinking of. He was an excellent teacher. So I didn't know much about poetry. And he just kind of broke it down. I don't want to say in a way you could understand, because you really had to pay attention and really get it. But he was very clear and concise. So it was just a matter of how receptive you were to his teaching, right? And he for the most part praised the work that I did, right? It wasn't perfect, right? He had his critiques of it and how to make it better. and he made my writing better through the revision, the editing process. And so by the end of that course, I kind of thought like, well, this is it. And he was like, but you're taking my advanced workshop next quarter. And I was like, well, what about intermediate? Because it was 3 workshops, beginning, intermediate, and advanced. Like, what about intermediate? It's like, don't worry about it. You can do that later. You can do advanced. And I was just the kind of person who couldn't say no to authority. So I agreed to take, advanced poetry workshop, and I had, liked it. And that kind of did away with, the fiction track. In fiction, we had Susan Straight, the novelist, is National Book Award finalist for her book, High Wire Moon. Her last book was a finalist for like the Kirkus Prize. So she was a very good teacher. She was, young then. She had a few novels under her belt at the time, and she was on faculty. And I remember I signed up for her fiction workshop, and I was there for a week until I realized that I needed a particular class to graduate, and it conflicted with the class, so I had to drop out of that class. So I, for the most part, Christopher Buckley, and who was on the faculty that I remember, you had like the full professors, you had like, or at least the tenure track associate professors, et cetera, but you had Christopher Buckley in poetry, you had Susan Straight in fiction, and then you had this faculty that you heard of, but I had never seen them on campus. For example, when I would go pick up my class schedule, I always had to check in with an advisor to make sure I was on the track to get my degree. And then I would get like a slip that had my classes on it, and on it was the advisor on it was Percival Everett, who won the Pulitzer Prize this year, I think, right? But I never saw him. Word was that he was teaching at like USC or something, or UCLA, one of those. And so it was Christopher Buckley, Susan Straight, and then we had kind of like the associate faculty, which was Frances McConnell, and then I think Judith Bloomfield, and then there was a lecturer poet named Derek McCown, and then you had emeritus faculty like Stephen Minot, who had written a lot of books, published a lot of books, written a lot of books on writing. But for me at the time, creative writing was Christopher Buckley. And then I'd bump into, Susan Straight at events and talk to her. And then there was like what I'd call Judy and Frances. But that to me was kind of the core. And then in my senior year, when I pretty much was ready to graduate, had gotten all my requirements, they brought in the poet Gary Soto to teach for about, I think it was like 2 or 3 years he was going to teach. So I didn't take a class with him. I worked with him on a different capacity, but that was the faculty at the time, and I'm sure I believe Susan Straight is still there, but the faculty has rotated with a lot of good writers on there today.
Do you remember maybe the first poem you ever wrote in that workshop, or any kind of particular pieces that strike a memory?
Yeah, I believe the first poem I wrote in that beginning poetry workshop was one called, I called it like Watering the Plants or Watering the Pots in the Fall, which is in my first book. And I remember it because the first assignment was the catalog poem, also known as the list poem. And so Chris Buckley had brought in, various examples of poems that would be based by lists, or you're listing things. And the object was that when you're writing poetry, I mean, this should apply to fiction too, but when you're writing poetry, you have to be specific, right? You don't want to be general. You have, the more specific you are, kind of the more poetic you can be, right? Because these lists can bring surprises to the reader. So I wrote a poem based on the chore I had when I come home after school. I would have to water these plants in the pots because my dad was a gardener, and he always had plants. And so he'd maybe go to the nursery and and maybe he had to buy 4 pots of some, young tree, and maybe he only used 3 of them for work, and so he would put this 4th one that he didn't use out in the backyard, and it just stayed there for years. And so he had just a bunch of plants in pots, and I have to water them after school. So I wrote a poem about that. Yeah, which again ended up going into my first book. Yeah.
What happened after graduation?
So what happened after I graduated really starts with what happened before I graduated. I know I was, ending my junior year in college, and I didn't know exactly what was going to happen to me. I was a creative writing major, sociology major. What are my options? I had no idea. I know the one option was going back to work with my dad, which is not what I wanted to do. Chris Buckley was a great teacher because he encouraged us to publish, to send out our work to publish. Even at the end of Beginning Poetry Workshop, he showed us how to submit our poems to journals. And I was lucky enough to get a poem published around my senior year. I wrote it maybe beginning of my senior year, and it was published by the end of my senior year. It was published in Rattle. So I was very excited about that. And he would also encourage us or tell us about getting an MFA in poetry for him, right? But going to grad school, and he'd tell us things like, they could pay it. You can get a full ride doing it. It's a possibility. So at the beginning of my senior year, I just kind of thought, well, maybe I'll go to grad school. Maybe I'll continue on with poetry. I've been, I've had this kind of early luck getting published. My poems were well received by the faculty. Maybe I have a chance. So I went to him and I asked him if he can help me apply to graduate school. And he made a list of schools that I should apply to, what was then Southwest Texas State University, which is now Texas State University. University of Pittsburgh, I remember, University of Ohio, University of Arizona, Arizona State University. These were places that he knew people on the faculty. He had friends on the faculty, places that he thought that maybe I would have a good chance of acceptance and good chance of getting scholarships. But that scared me. It scared me to think that I would suddenly live in Pittsburgh. And so I kind of sabotaged my applications, not sending them GRE scores, because I had to say apply to 8 schools. And when you do the GRE, you can send 4 scores to 4 schools and then pick for the rest. And I just never paid. So I kind of sabotaged myself, kind of being scared to do that. I ended up getting into an admittance to Southwest Texas State University. They were going to give me a full ride. I said yes, and then I got into Arizona State University, which was much closer. So I called them and I said, I'm not going after all, and for personal reasons. And then I ended up going to Arizona State University. Before I graduated, I got for my creative writing degree, we had to do a senior thesis, which was a collection of poems, and then write a statement about them. And Christopher Buckley showed my poems to Gary Soto. Gary Soto and Chris Buckley were good friends, old friends. They went to UC Irvine together. They were in an MFA program together. They were best buds. And he showed Soto my manuscript, and Soto said that he would publish my manuscript for the Chicano Chapbook series. So during my senior year, I told Gary that I wanted to help make the book, because back then it was just making chapbooks was like photocopying and stapling, right? It's not as advanced as you can make it now. So I said, I want to learn how to make books. So let me make the book under your supervision. And so he taught me how to do the dummy book first. I did that. And then when I showed him kind of the final. I just sent him the file, and he printed it out, and hired Rody Montijo, who is now a children's book author, to do the cover. It was like his first professional work, so he did my cover, did the cover of others, and he published it, out of his own pocket. So I had like a real publication. I had a chapbook from a historic, prestigious chapbook line. And so at the end of my senior year, something came across Buckley's desk, which was an opportunity for a writing grant from the Elizabeth George Foundation. Elizabeth George is a mystery novel writer. She's a mystery writer who I think may have done a PhD at UC Riverside. So she wanted to kind of encourage writers and encourage writers from UC Riverside to apply. So I applied for a grant to the Elizabeth George Foundation, and I ended up getting it, I think before I graduated or maybe right after. So I got into Arizona State. They gave me a full scholarship for the first year. They said, well, we'll figure it out after that. And then I came in with some money from the Elizabeth George Foundation that was also kind of on a probationary status, saying, please report to us after your first semester, and we'll see if we renew the grant. And I continued doing, pretty well. I had won in graduate school. I had won a contest, and that published another chapbook, and I reapplied for the second part of the grant and got that. So there was a lot of luck and a lot of guidance, that senior year that was able to get me into an MFA program in poetry at Arizona State, immediately after graduation.
Tell us about your experience at ASU, maybe some of the faculty that resonated with you, maybe workshops, even readings, anything that you remember.
Yeah, I mean, Arizona State was a good experience. I also had, not so positive, negative experience at Arizona State, not necessarily having to do with the program, just having to do with being a 22-year-old now living on his own. I was living with my brother. So there were ups and downs. One of the reasons I went to Arizona State was to work with Alberto Rios, because he was another, Chicano poet, and he was also part of the Chicano chapbook series. So it was important for me to know that I was going to have a mentor who was Chicano. So Arizona State was only about 4 hours away from Indio, so I can easily drive back and forth. I had a Chicano mentor. It was a good place for me to be. My younger brother ended up going to a technical school there in Phoenix also. So he and I lived together, rented an apartment together.
If you'll just redo that.
Mm-hmm. My brother went to a technical school or vocational school in Phoenix, so he and I got an apartment together. So at least I had my younger brother there. My first year at Arizona State, I was on a full scholarship on financial aid, which meant that I didn't have to teach. I got a work study job that was very easy, that helped, that covered my bills. If I started in August of 2000, by November, I had met Sandra Cisneros, and meeting her was also kind of a slow turning point in my life. But she offered to blur my chapbook. So being at Arizona State then opened up these other opportunities to work with other writers and meet other writers. And I, as part of my scholarship, my program coordinator would give me these small gigs that would pay me. So those things would be helping with the MFA reading series, or hosting some, if a poet came in to visit, maybe I would have a workshop with some high school students, and then and then I'd bring the high school students to the poet and have like small discussions. So it opened these kind of opportunities. In 2002, I was awarded a national fellowship for graduate studies. It was called the national. It was called the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans, and that's I got an interview, and at the interview is where I met Cecilia Bayi, who's also part of Macondo, and she helped me get into Macondo. And the fellowship was a 2-year fellowship, but it started. I think I got it my second year, and I wanted to take advantage of the money, so I extended my stay at Arizona State to 4 years. So they allowed me to stay an extra year because I was getting funded. In my second year at Arizona State, I became a TA. That was part of my fellowship, so I got the stipend reimbursed. But after I got the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship, I didn't have to be a TA for work because the fellowship was going to pay for half my tuition. So I just said, I want the teaching experience. Can I just teach one class instead of two? And they allowed me to do that. What I liked about Arizona State University was, working with Alberto Rios. We call him Tito Rios. He, was a great teacher. I learned so much from him. I wish I could have taken more classes. I also explored other genres. I took fiction workshop. Thanks to this, extra year I had, I took fiction workshop. I took independent studies. And kind of just created my own degree in a way. Obviously, I did poetry, that sort of stuff. I love that Arizona State had such a stature and standing in the MFA world that a lot of these great writers would come in. I remember taking a small workshop with, like, say, Billy Collins, who was poet laureate at the time. David St. John. We had brought in quite a few people. The last year I was there, that's when I believe Virginia Piper had passed away, and we found out that she had bequeathed Arizona State University this huge multi-million-dollar, a gift. And that's how the Virginia G. Piper Center was opened, which was separate from the MFA program. It was a different entity. So I was there to watch the inception of that, and they held the first. It's called Desert Nights Rising Stars program. So I was at the first one, and so as MFA students, we got to attend, for free, and we who were getting ready to graduate had a private audience with Adrienne Rich at the time. So there was just a lot of opportunities to meet these great famous and now a lot of them have passed away poets at that program. Of course, so much more to say about that, right?
I know.
Due to time constraints.
I know. I want to pick your brain so much about your graduate experience because it's definitely a contrast, and they're just. Of course, I went to U of A. What time? What time?
We have another 9 minutes till it's an hour. It's 11:30.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Kind of want to get through these questions. But I want to create an arc between what you had said earlier about, was it Cecilia Bayi that introduced you to Macondo.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can talk more about that. How did you first hear about Macondo? What did you think of it? How did you first hear about Macondo?
So, again, when I got the interview for the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans, this was in the year 2002. We had to do an interview first, and they flew me out to Los Angeles for the interview. At that interview, met several people, but one of them was Cecilia Bayi. I believe she was probably in San Antonio at the time, maybe El Paso at the time. And so we met. It was her and this other, interviewee. His name was Charlie Gallinada from El Paso. And we were the three Mexican-American Chicanos there, so we kind of gravitated toward each other. So we did the interview, and it turned out of, how many of us were there? 15 or 30? I don't remember. Cecilia and I were awarded this fellowship out of this fantastic group. I don't know how I got it. And so we then went to a conference. So at the conference, I see Cecilia, and so there's already kind of a history and this, kind of bonding, and of course make friends with the other fellows. And but having met Cecilia was kind of the beginning of this long, friendship. And so after the conference, Cecilia and I kept in touch in whatever way, email and whatnot. And at some point, maybe even through phone calls. And at some point, Cecilia had mentioned she was in the Macondo Writers Workshop with Sandra Cisneros. And I had never heard of it before. Like Sandra did not mention this to me when I had met her, years before. And so Cecilia went to the workshop. She told me about this workshop, and she told me about the opportunity of being in class or learning from Sandra herself. And to me, that was like the most wonderful thing in the world. And I told Cecilia, how do you get me in? Get me in. And so back in those days, the way you were admitted into workshop is that you had to have someone in the workshop essentially vouch for you or nominate you. So if you became a member, you got the privilege to nominate somebody else to be part of the workshop. And it was only one person. And I said, Cecilia, nominate me. You have to nominate me. I want to be in there. I know Sandra. I've met her before once, right? And so she nominated me. Maybe she had to write some sort of like a letter of recommendation for me. So my nomination was put in, and then I, wrote an application. Back then, the application, which the criteria still stands today, but Macondo wanted seasoned writers. They wanted writers who had experience writing. So all the trials and tribulations of being a novice, of being critiqued in class, like we didn't have to deal with it. So they had about three requirements. Was like, have you taken workshops before? Do you have an MFA? Have you worked under any writers? Do you have anything published? So that was kind of one criteria, or you had to fit that criteria. And then they also wanted writers who were engaged in social justice and community work and community activism. So that was another criteria, and I fit both. So I did the application. I've turned in the application I wrote to the archives for Voces. And so I did the application, turned it in, and luckily I was accepted. And that's how I first heard of Macondo.
What year did you first come to Macondo? And tell us, who did you study with? What was that like?
Okay. So my first year at Macondo was in the year 2004. I believe it was mostly the first week of August that it happened. It might have started in the last day of July. And then from there, we continued on the first week of August. Back then, the workshops had these sort of tiers. If this was your first year at Macondo, you had to take workshop with what they called the alumni faculty. So someone who had already gone through Macondo, however way they were selected, taught the first year class, right? And at the time, it was 3 teachers. The first years, they had a nickname for first years at Macondo. They were the mocosos or the mocosas because we were the first ones there. We weren't necessarily young, but we're like, the newbies, right? Little kids with runny noses, right? So we were the mocosos, the mocosas. At the time, I was 25 years old, and I believe I was the youngest member there. and by far. So everyone else was very experienced. I was probably, the next oldest was probably 30. The three workshop leaders was Jocelyn Lockett, Kristen Naka, and I want to say Nancy Mirabel. I had a cohort of 10. I know, gosh, who was in there? I'm drawing a blank. I have their names somewhere, but I'm drawing a blank. But it was 10 of us. There was someone else that I knew at Macondo at the time. His name is Alex Espinoza, no relation. But Alex and I went to the same creative writing program, and we graduated. Kind of went through the same classes, and we walked graduation at the same time. So I knew him, and I ended up meeting other writers who became long-standing friends. Now, Miguel Angel, I've lost my train of thought, so you got to put me on track, because I could go any which way. What else can I answer? Or
I think you're on the right track. I'm compelled.
So Macondo in 2004 was held at Our Lady of the Lake. I know they lent us rooms to gather in. I'm not sure what other things they provided for us, but we had to provide our own housing, and we had to provide our own housing, find transportation of sort. Macondo offered scholarships. I guess maybe need-based scholarships. I had just graduated from my MFA program, that May. And in, I believe, July, I went to another workshop. It was the National Book Foundation Summer Writing Camp in Bennington, Vermont. And almost immediately after that, I went to Macondo. So my money was tight, and they said they had scholarships. And so I applied for a scholarship. I don't remember the application process, but in my mind, I thought there was this fund, this endowment, and this committee, reading applications, or however it was formal. When I found out that I got the scholarship, and I was asked how much I would need, and I'd say enough to cover the airfare at least, I received a personal check from Sandra Cisneros. So she was the scholarship fund. She just has always been so generous, with making sure writers get what they want. So I received a $500 scholarship or a personal check from Sandra to attend, and it covered my airfare and maybe some meals and whatnot. Also, I guess, a place to stay. So we had to find a place to stay. Wow, that one's loud. One of the popular places to stay was this place called La Casa de Maria y Marta. And I knew that it was run by two women who were Mennonites. That always had to be thrown in. And it was cheap housing. It was like a 2-story house, and other Macondistas were renting rooms inside. That's, I remember that's how I met Erasmo Guerra, who's become a friend, Fan Wu, who was a first-year Macondista. That's another person I went to first-year class with. There were other writers. La Casa de Maria Marta was down a little bit of a long walk, but kind of down the street from Sandra's house, the famous purple house of hers on Gunther Street. And so Sandra offered rides. Where we stayed and where Our Lady of the Lake campus was held from Macondo was quite a distance, right? So we needed rides, and Sandra offered rides to whoever needed one. And of course, I jumped on it. I just wanted to have some space with Sandra. I hadn't talked to Sandra in about 4 years since I had met her. And so when I met her again at the welcome dinner, it was like we never lost touch. She was just so warm and welcome and gave me a big abrazo and whatnot. And so, of course, I wanted to spend time with Sandra, and it was because I wanted to learn from her. Like, if you were a good writer, obviously she is, very unique and means a lot to the Chicano community, Mexican American community, to a lot of people. Not just that, but I wanted to learn from her because that's how I was becoming a good writer, was learning from good writers and what they had to say. So she gave us a ride. It was like 4 of us, and we drive with her to the campus, to workshops, and of course we start off with, hey, how's it going? Where are you from? How are you liking it? But then she would drop these like nuggets of writing advice. Things like, oh, have you heard about, well, not heard about because it's her invention, but like, oh, there's that thing, like I tell people the 10 by 10 by 10 by 10, which is like, list 10 things that make you different from everybody else. And so we're talking about writing in that way. And I'm like storing it in my head. I'm like, I'm going to write this down. And all the stuff that these gold nuggets that she would drop, I would write them down. Because again, going back to this kind of a tier system, when you were first year at Macondo, you learned under the alumni faculty. Then the second year, you would take a workshop. If you chose to go second year, you would take a workshop with whom we would call a famoso or a famosa. And that was another writer of, bigger stature. I think now the famoso faculty is, I think now the famosa faculty is referred to as like the luminary, right? These are the guest faculty of great stature. And then it's not till your third year that you got to work with Sandra. And so in my mind, I was like, all right, like I'm down, right? Second year I get to work with the famosa. Third year I get to work with Sandra. And that third year, something happened. What would have been my third year, something happened, and I never got to take a workshop with Sandra. I can't remember what it was. Maybe she didn't teach, or her class was full, or I couldn't afford to go, or something. I would have to really think back, but I never got to work with Sandra. But at the long run, it didn't really matter because I got to spend time with her, or be around her, get rides or sit next to her at dinner, and she dropped these nuggets of wisdom. So maybe she was not directly critiquing anything I wrote, but I was learning from her. So there's that. And then I guess I must switch back to first year, which will have to be edited out or edited. So back when I was a first year Macondista, this 2004, Macondo is organized in some ways, but not organized in other ways. So what would happen then was that there were a lot of local writers who were not part of the workshop, who wanted to be part of the experience anyway. So in one way or the other, these local writers or friends would join us at events such as dinner. So there came a point, I remember, we were going to walk to a restaurant for dinner, and it's just this huge group of people. And it came to a point where it was causing, I guess, some difficulty because we'd say, oh, we're going to have dinner at this restaurant. But then there would be what I had heard, 70 people. Maybe not all 70 people would show up at the workshop, but there were, take for example, if there were 3 workshops with 10 students in each workshop, that's 30 people. And then you add faculty and people who would help, like the administrative and whatnot. So technically, there should only be about 30 to 40 participants in the workshop. But at its peak, we'd have about 70 or 75 folks kind of gathered around, joining for dinner or other events. And because is it the beeping that's coming on?
Oh, I barely heard that.
So you'd have about 70 people almost at once somehow, and there wasn't this sort of gatekeeping at the time, right? It's people say you can't be here, like this is too much, right? This is participants only. It was more open invitation. But I remember at the end of Macondo, we had like the circle, the feedback circle. So this either happened in 2004 or my second year in 2005. We were having feedback circle, and somebody in general brought up this idea that it's grown too big. Like there has to be some control over attendance, because you can't have 50 people join for tacos, right? Like where do you seat all of them? Time constraints. And so in however way she addressed it, Sandra said something to the likes of like, yes, and then you have the people who are not part of the workshop. They're just like chuparosas, just kind of hovering about, we got to find, something for them, or I got to figure things out. And that's kind of that's how the idea of the chuparosa came about, which is to say like, listen, if you cannot kind of hang out and take up space if you're not involved in the workshop in some capacity. If you're not a teacher, if you're not a student, like you have to contribute something. So the idea of the chuparosa was created in the sense that, well, at least you're here working independently on your own, working on your own independent project. So you're part of it, you're doing something, and then you have the privilege to join the larger group later for dinners or for the seminars and whatnot. But we have to formalize it in a way to keep that workshop from getting too big and essentially unruly and this crowd control kind of deal. And that's how Chuparosa came about. Was someone who was applying, they had to pay a small fee, and they got to be part of the program. And to me, the Chuparosa is like a writer's residency. And it's one of the best writer's residencies, because once you're in Macondo, you're always a member of Macondo. You don't have to reapply. You just have to tell administration you're going to show up. And then you pay your fee, and then you bring your project here. I didn't get to do too many residencies. And for anyone who's not a writer and doesn't know, residencies are so competitive, right? Residencies are so competitive, and they're very expensive to attend. And so you cannot apply to residency or say like, I'm going to take August off and write at this location. It's like, no, you have to wait to get in and wait for all this other things. But with Macondo, if you want, there's a space for you. You just tell them you're going to show up, and you pay what I know for a lot of us, because we're writers, an expensive fee, but it's not expensive compared to the other places. Yeah, I don't know if there's another question.
I really like that you elaborated on that. How many times have you been to Macondo, either as a Macondista or as someone who contributes like a Chuparosa guide in total?
I tried to go to Macondo as often as possible. I went 2004, 2005. I went 2006. 2007 is a little sketchy. I don't know if I was able to go, because by that time I was an adjunct. I wasn't making a lot of money. I may have also skipped 2008. That was the year I got married. So I don't think the finances were possible. My book came out late in 2008, and Sandra had invited me if I wanted to teach one of the workshops. And it turned out for 2009. And however way it happened, it was myself and Fan Wu, who was a novelist who had just published her book also. We co-taught a workshop in 2009. Around 2010, this is where my memory fades a little bit, but I know it's around 2010, 2011, where the partnership between Macondo and Our Lady no longer stands for whatever reason, and it moves to the Guadalupe Cultural Center, and it was held at the Guadalupe. And I know that there were some things there that happened that, were good and not so good, but I was not part of that. At that point, I had not necessarily not as lots of communication with some Macondistas, but definitely with the organization, and it was different. I know things were laid out differently and whatnot. So if I co-taught as a teacher in 2009, I don't even remember when the next time. Maybe I did go in 2007. I think I may have 2007 because I was able to nominate and get in the writer, poet, playwright, editor, Diana Murray Delgado. Like, she was my nomination there, and I think she went in 2007, and I was there in 2007. So I might have skipped 2008, came back as a teacher in 2009. And I don't know the next time I went to Macondo, and since 2009. When I moved to San Antonio in 2018, I went to Macondo public events in 2019. So there may have been a 10-year gap. And that was being held at the Texas A&M San Antonio campus. And I know I attended a seminar. I think it was a public seminar because I was not officially there as a member capacity.
Could you just re-say that?
Mm-hmm. I attended in 2019 as more of a public participant, not an official participant. And then I know 2020 happened, or I should say, then the pandemic hit in 2020, and I believe Macondo was not going to be held in person. It went online. And then they offered $200 fees to be a chuparosa online. And I wanted to be part of it, and the price was right. So I joined as a chuparosa in 2020, and then I believe it was 2020. And then once again, same thing in 2021. I know that I participated in Macondo in some capacity since 2019. I guess in 2023 and 2024, I was a chuparosa guide with Ito Romo, and then today and this week in 2025, I'm back again as a workshop participant. Oh, I forgot. I think I said maybe 2029 I was a workshop participant. No.
2029?
Maybe, sorry, that's in the future.
Well,
I believe in the year 2009, I was a teacher. So it was maybe the year 2010, possibly the year 2011, that I participated as a workshop participant in poetry with the poet Ai, right before she passed away. So she was the workshop leader. I don't remember the date, whether it was 2010, 2011, but that was the last time I did Macondo before 2019.
That's really cool.
I feel bad for the editor. I don't know how they're going to stitch all that.
No. Actually, it's quite an arc, right? Like, I want to ask the next question, and how has your involvement with the Macondo Writers Workshop changed you and your writing?
Macondo, it's funny about trying to answer how Macondo has changed me, because I feel like it's not that Macondo has changed me, or I don't think about it in terms of how it changed me, but Macondo has become a very important piece of my life and my writing career, because to me, Macondo has always meant community. Macondo bills itself as the homeland for writers, and I feel that is so true. Like, Macondo is this home base. Like I could live anywhere in the United States, live anywhere in the world, and I know that I have a home in San Antonio. I mean, I live here, so literally I have a home in San Antonio. But I know that there's always a space for me, that it is a community. When I was going to Macondo, I lived in Northern California. I lived in San Jose. And I met a lot of writers from all over the states, but particularly from San Antonio. When I moved to San Antonio in the year 2018, and I hadn't been to workshops in years, but there were people I knew, it all came together naturally and organically. Like I knew people, like I had a family here, and friendships, friends who I hadn't seen in years. That stuff was like quickly rekindled in no time. Like we picked up where we last left off, and I knew people. I mean, again, it wasn't a new city, but I'd never lived here. I'd visited plenty of times, but it was still new in many ways. Like I was a tourist essentially until you live here, and it's much different. And I didn't realize how many people I knew here, and how much help and connections and whatnot that I had. So Macondo it's always been important to me in community. Like I have people here. These are folks that I can relate with, that I have a long history, 20-year history with. I love going to the residencies that I've done, but most of the times I'm like the only Chicano, the only Mexican American there. I'm the only one there, which is fine. I have no issue with that, but this is the only place where you really feel at home. Like I mean, I guess Canto Mundo can replicate that. I've never been to Canto Mundo. But yeah, it's a homeland. So when I think of it, I'm not sure if it's changed me in the way that question is posed, but it's always been a part of me. It's like saying, well, how has your family changed you? Well, of course it's changed me in some way, but it's my family. Like it's an experience that I've lived through. What I also liked is you had so many writers come through Macondo, so many, Latino, Latina, Latinx writers. That is my way of like making friends. I want to make friends with everyone who is Latino or identifies with Latino. I mean, of course, not possible, but that's how I met people. I meet people, or get to know who's writing, who's new, who's in an MFA program, who's out, who's doing this. Making those connections. I love having access to the faculty. Like, in 2005, I took a fiction workshop with Denise Chavez. I remember Luis Rodriguez was there. And even though I didn't take a workshop with him, I remember sitting next to him, having beers and talking with him. John Philip Santos, Naomi Shihab Nye. The list goes on. In 2006, I took workshop with Alicia Gaspar de Alba. I took workshop with the poet I. And then, whoever else has come through, get to know them. Like, I don't know where else I could get that. I don't know where else I could really get that access, to these great teachers and get to know them. I want to talk about kind of how things were like in 2004 and 2005 in Macondo. Macondo was getting organized, but there were still a lot of things that we were trying to figure out. So again, in 2004, you were able to get into Macondo if somebody who was already a member nominated you. You did you filled out an application. That application was sent to an application coordinator. That coordinator was a Macondista who volunteered their time, because Macondo, getting itself organized, didn't have a paid labor, didn't have a dedicated staff to do all this. So we all had to volunteer, or was strongly encouraged to volunteer our time to Macondo as a way to give back to Macondo. It's always had that ethos. And Macondo has survived this long based on the volunteer hours and energy and time of other Macondistas. So the application got sent to a coordinator who was a Macondista volunteering, and then that application was sent to a committee of anywhere between 5 to 10 other Macondistas, probably closer to 5, who were volunteering their time to read the applications. Somebody would come up with a scoring system, and I did volunteer to do applications 1 year. And so we read the applications. We got many, and it really was based on the strength of manuscripts. It wasn't based on, I don't believe they were anonymous per se, but it was based on the strength of writing and obviously the criteria that they filled. It was, as far as I know, there was not any favoritism in that sort of way. I remember the administrative assistants, which were supposed to be this like 3-hour a week, volunteer situation. Never turned out like that. I know by 2004, Cecilia Bailly had volunteered to do the administrative work, and for her, it was a full-time job. She was working 30, 40 hours a week, putting Macondo together and coordinating it. So we get there, and we have a welcome dinner, and then we have the workshops from 1 to 4 is traditionally was it. In 2004, I believe we all had to find our own housing. In 2005, Our Lady of the Lake opened up their residence halls for us, for those who chose. So we got to stay in the residence halls, and did that come with meals? I don't remember. But we stayed in the residence halls in 2005. I believe the same in 2006. In fact, I think by that time, as long as we're at Our Lady of the Lake, they had the residence halls. So folks stayed there. And that was nice because it was this dorm-like experience. You got to meet other Macondistas in the hallway. There were, for some reason, I don't know how it was planned, but we did have these evening seminars. So early seminars were local writers who had a topic to discuss of some sort. I'm sure it was Sandra who asked them, "Hey, will you discuss this?" One seminar I remember was going to Wings Press, like the actual Wings Press, and the publisher, his name evades me at the moment, but he gave us a tour of the press, and told us what they do and the mission and whatnot. And in the evenings after dinner, we'd gather around somewhere and listen to somebody talk about their experience. I remember one year, this must have been 2007. Sandra asked her agent Stuart Bernstein if he would come and meet with Macondistas in a kind of what would you call it, like an appointment, like ask an agent, sort of a appointment. And I signed up right away. I wasn't a fiction writer, but I wanted to meet him. And that's how I first met Stuart Bernstein. And over the years, there's a gap, but the last few years, he and I have had a good friendship and a good working relationship. And this is, again, thanks to the the generosity of our guests and the generosity of Sandra, really asking folks to come down and help. Dinners were often impromptu. A local would think of a place to eat. They're often very popular hangouts that people liked, and they said, "Well, let's all meet there." One of them is the Liberty Bar. It's a friend of Macondo and plenty of space, so we'd say, "Let's meet at Liberty Bar," and we all had to find rides and go, which is, I think, still true to now. Today, it's a bit more organized, a bit more formal. We still have, luckily we have partnerships with the universities willing to host us. but in some ways, things that have changed. For example, we did away with the mocoso, mocosa, probably a little bit too derogatory. Back then, it was kind of just tongue in cheek, and we still have the chuparosas. And there's no more tier system where, like, if you're first year, you have to be in this workshop and you know this and that. Sandra will teach every once in a while, but you get to pick which workshop you want to do. There's no more alumni-run workshops, although I'm sure that can happen if one wanted to. And then, but we still have that tradition of the seminar when a professional in the field comes and talks to the group. So that has still stayed the same. Let me check the time.
It's about 12. It's about 12:11, maybe 12:12.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good stopping point or doing any kind of wrap up.
You can wrap up. You can say a few closing sentences, or we can just kind of conclude, whatever you'd like.
Okay. I guess this will be my 21st year as a Macondo participant, and I think it's been an honor to have started, early. Obviously, there are people who've done it even earlier and go back to Sandra's kitchen, but I think it's one thing no one really tells you as a young writer or anybody is you're going to grow up, you're going to grow old, and you're going to see these sort of institutions kind of thrive. And what started off as like a cool little experience, you don't really realize that you're also kind of watching, this history, unfold and evolve in that way. And I think that's, Macondo has opened up so many opportunities for me, whether it's meeting other writers and working with other teachers, that I'm just so indebted to it. And that's why I always try to give what I can back to Macondo.
John, thank you so much. This concludes the interview.